Welcome to Lesson 6 in my series on Gabriel music notation, which is my invention improving traditional notation so that it is much easier to learn. And on this program, I want to compare the staff of traditional notation compared to the staff of Gabriel notation. And it is superior in a number of ways. For example, all of the intervals are correct. In fact, they are even more correct than on a keyboard. And not only that, but you only have to learn 12 note and staff conjunctions, just as learning a keyboard. There are 7 white keys, there are 5 black keys. That's all you have to learn. You don't have to learn 15 different key signatures, for example. So let's take a look at the traditional staff compared to Gabriel staff. So here on the left we have the traditional staff, 5 lines, equally spaced, and 3 notes registered on that clef. This is the treble clef. And on the right, we have the corresponding Gabriel clef. And as you can see, the Gabriel clef does register a few more notes at the top, and it is slightly larger because it has to accommodate the black notes as well as all the white notes. Of course, the major advantage is that you don't have to have 15 different key signatures to register those black notes. Notice that the notes in a regular staff ascend by 1/2 of a note. In other words, this is A, and B is 1/2 of a note above, even though it is a whole step. And C is also a 1/2 a note above, even though it is only a 1/2 a step. Those intervals are not pictured correctly. Now, on a Gabriel staff, those intervals are correct. We have the A sharp, a 1/2 a tone above, another 1/2 tone is B, and another 1/2 tone is C. In order to get 4 notes in the same vertical space as 3 notes in traditional notation, the notes in Gabriel notation ascend the clef by 1/3 of a note head. As you can see, B, for example, is divided into thirds, and 2/3 of the note is above the clef line, and 1/3 of the note is below the clef line. The same with A sharp. So now let's look at some typical chords, or I should say locations on the staff. These are not really chords. I don't think anyone would ever actually play these chords. But the D is always the most important note to locate, because on Gabriel notation, it is exactly halfway between the 2 lines which are farther apart, the ABC line and the EFG line. And at the middle part of the treble clef, it would be located right in the center of the clef, as I pointed out on earlier programs. And D is also the most important to locate on a keyboard because it is the most obvious. It is the white key between the 2 black keys, as I have noted also before on previous programs. So here we see the new D is slightly below the D in the traditional notation, and at the top of the staff, or the treble clef, I should say, is C, and it is slightly above C in the traditional staff. Therefore, the Gabriel notation is about 5% wider or higher than traditional notation. Let's take a look at some typical chords. I guess you could say chords, although there's actually more notes than here you would find in a typical chord. And in traditional notation, we have the notes on the lines starting with E, G, B, D, and F. If you've ever taken piano lessons, you know that stands for every good boy does fine, or every good boy deserves fudge. You don't have to learn those mechanicals when you learn Gabriel notation. We don't have slogans like that. you only have to learn 12 different note and staff conjunctions in Gabriel notation because they repeat throughout the grand staff, both in the bass and the treble clef. Notice, for example, here on traditional notation, this E above middle D is located on a line, whereas the E one octave higher is located on a space. Very incongruous. The same way with F. F is located at the bottom space of a traditional clef and is located at the top line. There is no consistency. In fact, it changes throughout the staff. On the other hand, if you look at Gabriel notation, you'll notice that E is located at the space just below the EFG line, and it's the same space an octave above, just below the EFG line. And the same with F. F is located on the EFG line, it's intersected by that line, and the same at one octave above. And that pattern is not only found in this part of the treble clef, but actually throughout the staff. You only learn 12 note and staff conjunctions. So now let's look at some of the problems with traditional notation. What happens when you want to add the black keys in traditional notation? Well, let's try the example that we gave before. All the notes on the lines and all the notes on the spaces, and we'll just put a sharp notation in front of the notes. What does that do to the notes? Well, if you're playing in traditional notation, you have to remember that you don't play any of those notes. You have to remember that you play the note one half above. In other words, E sharp is actually F. G sharp is actually the black key just above the white note. And the same with all of the other notes. Now, Gabriel notation notates each of those correctly and exactly. E sharp is actually F, and as you can tell, the way I have it pictured here, it looks like a white note because it is a white note. It has a sharp angular interior to the white note because it is, according to music theory, an E sharp rather than an F. Now with a piano, it really doesn't matter. You could notate this as a white note. Some instruments can differentiate between an E sharp and an F. A G sharp is a black key compared to a white key over here with a sign. B sharp is once again a C, and therefore it's a white note. D sharp is a black key, it is not a white key. And F sharp is a white key, is a black key, not a white key. And the same we see with the notes on the spaces. F, A, C, E, the F, A, the F sharp, the A sharp, and the C sharp are black notes. The E sharp is an F. And all of these intervals are correctly displayed. These notes are excuse me, these notes are, let's see, E sharp and G sharp is one whole space apart. Whereas between G sharp and B sharp, which is actually C, you have 3 half spaces apart. And that is indicated by the gap between those notes. The same way with the gap between those 2 notes. The same with the gap with these 2 notes. So let's take a look now at indicating by flats the same notes. In other words, if we take these same notes and put a flat sign in front of them, we get completely different notes. And this is what they look like in Gabriel notation. In other words, the E sharp now is an E flat, which is a black key. The G is a G flat, the B flat, the D flat, and the F flat is actually an E. That's why it looks like a white note, because it is a white note. Notice how the flats have a slightly different shape than the sharps. It's very obvious when you're playing which are flats, which are sharps, and which are white notes. That's not true with Gabriel notation. And the same with these four notes, which originally are found on the spaces on traditional staff. We see that when you flat those four notes, they look completely different because they are completely different notes. They should look differently. So now let's take a look at maybe some chords that are a little easier to notice. Now, you might be discouraged with Gabriel. You'll say, wow, that's complicated. It's really not complicated. These are more typical chords. I think I've showed you these before. These are very easy to read. The D, F sharp, A, that would be a typical chord. D major. 2 white keys, 1 black key. Much easier to play than, it's easier to read, I should say. It's as easy to play as it is to read. And the same way with E major. And the same with, let's see, where am I on the keyboard here? E, G sharp, and B. And then F, A, and C. So, in conclusion, as far as the comparison of the traditional notation with Gabriel notation is not only much more accurate as far as the steps go, as far as the intervals go, but it also is much easier to read because there is only 12 note and staff conjunctions to memorize. With traditional notation, it changes all up and down the staff from bass clef to treble clef and through 15 different key signatures. And that concludes Lesson 6 in my series on Gabriel music notation, which I hope you are beginning to realize is much easier to learn than traditional notation. You only have to learn 12 note and staff conjunctions with the Gabriel staff. The traditional staff, it looks good, but it is not. The notes are not correctly spaced. The intervals are sometimes a half space, sometimes a whole space. With Gabriel, not only is music theory satisfied, but it is much easier not only to read, but as you will find out, it is much easier to play.